During lunch with my in-laws, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number flashed on the screen. Don't react. They're recording you. The soft clatter of cutlery against plates filled the room, drowning out any real conversation. My mother-in-law's smile was stretched too wide, too practiced. My brother-in-law kept his eyes down, pushing food around his plate. And my husband, he ate like nothing was wrong, like this was just another ordinary Sunday meal. But my phone, resting on my lap, kept glowing with that message. Unknown number. Don't react. They're recording you. My stomach tightened. I forced a smile, pretending to enjoy my food while my mind raced. Recording me? Why? I wasn't hiding anything. I wasn't some criminal. I was just Dakota, a wife, a teacher, someone who tried to keep peace in a house where silence always weighed more than words. Even when my mother-in-law's comments cut deeper than she realized, or maybe exactly as deep as she intended, I never fought back. I'd just smile, nod, and pour another glass of wine. She had always looked at me with quiet disapproval. To her, I wasn't from a good family. Once, in front of everyone, she said, "Some people only marry to escape their own lives." I remember smiling through the humiliation that night, but inside, something in me cracked. Before I go on, if you're still listening, remember to like and subscribe. It's a simple way to support my work. That message during lunch felt like a warning. Maybe someone in that house was trying to protect me, or maybe someone was setting a trap. I kept eating, scanning the room carefully. A picture frame looked a little off. The wall socket, its cover slightly crooked, a new decorative object on the shelf that hadn't been there before. Was there a hidden camera? Were they hoping to catch me slipping? Angry, defensive, anything they could twist later? My name is Dakota, and I'm 34 years old, a literature teacher, trained to read between the lines, in words, in glances, in silence. And in that instant, every instinct in me screamed. I was being played, manipulated, or lured into something far bigger than I could yet see. Maybe a setup, maybe a legal trap, or maybe just another cruel attempt by my mother-in-law to erase me from their world entirely. But I did what I've always done best. I stayed quiet. I observed. I planned. If they were recording me, I'd give them nothing. No anger, no cracks, no proof of whatever story they were trying to build. And quietly, I decided I'd start recording too. The rules had changed. This wasn't lunch anymore. It was a siege, and I refused to be the casualty. Still, before I could act, I needed answers. Who sent that message? Why now? After everything I had already endured in silence. And here's the strangest part. Beneath the fear, I felt relief. Because if someone warned me, then maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely alone. Maybe someone in that house had a flicker of conscience left, or was scared of what was about to happen. But then came the questions that wouldn't stop echoing in my mind. What had they already captured? What were they planning to do with it? As I sat there pretending to eat, I started cataloging every humiliation, every insult I had ever swallowed. And something dark, sharp, and unfamiliar began to rise in me. Revenge. I wouldn't be the crazy one this time. Not the unstable one, not the ungrateful one. If they wanted to play games, I'd learn the rules, but I'd play by my own. Still, nothing could have prepared me for what I found the next day. When I stepped into my husband's office, the truth stared me in the face. Right there, on his desk, glowing in the dim light, was the proof. They had been filming me for weeks, and the reason why was so much worse than I ever imagined. That night, I waited for my husband to fall asleep. He snored softly beside me, the sound of someone either blissfully innocent or long practiced in the art of deceit. I slipped out of bed and moved toward his office, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The door creaked open. The computer was still on. And there it was, a folder, pulsing faintly on the desktop. Backup DK. It felt like it was calling to me. I clicked it open with trembling hands. Dozens of video files stared back at me, neatly labeled by date, by time, and by room. Kitchen, 0713.move. Bathroom, 0625.move. Bedroom, 0705.move. My breath caught. They weren't just watching me, they had been watching everything. My stomach twisted. They had recordings of me in the most private corners of my life. The bathroom, the bedroom, moments I thought were mine alone, arguments I thought stayed between me and my husband, or worse, me and my child. I forced myself to breathe as I opened one of the files. And there I was, sitting on the couch, phone pressed to my ear, talking to my therapist. I don't know how much longer I can stay in this house. I feel like I'm being watched. The irony hit so hard I almost laughed. Or cried. Maybe both. They had it all. My breakdowns, my fears, my private thoughts. Archived like I was some kind of case study or a threat that needed to be monitored. With every click, my anger spread like wildfire. They weren't just filming me. They were building something, twisting reality, cutting clips, stitching together lies. I noticed it when I caught a detail no one else would have. A shirt I'd worn after that phone call appeared in a video before it. They were editing me, rearranging my life, fabricating a version of me that didn't exist. But why? What story were they trying to tell? That I was unstable? Dangerous? I shut the computer and crept back upstairs, silent as the guilt that filled that house. Yes, I was hurt, humiliated, but beneath that, something had hardened. This wasn't just a family issue anymore. This was a violation, a crime, and I refused to be their silent victim. If they were recording me, then I would record them. Not secretly, not in the shadows, openly, fearlessly. The next morning, I bought an external hard drive, copied everything, made backups, set passwords, created a new email no one could trace, and sent the files to myself. Then I walked into my school, my sanctuary, and requested a medical leave for acute stress. The principal hesitated, his eyes full of quiet curiosity, but he signed the paper anyway. I needed time, silence, and a plan. Because revenge was no longer an idea. It had become a direction, a path I was ready to walk. For the next few days, I hid out in the public library, surrounded by strangers and the hum of old computers. There, I went through every single video, one by one, matching dates, timestamps, conversations, until I found the one that made my blood turn to ice. My son, sitting on his bed, talking to his grandmother. Her voice was calm, almost sweet. Soon, your mommy's going to leave, and the house will be yours. My hands shook. They were using my child, turning his innocence into leverage. That was the moment pain hardened into steel. Humiliation became fuel. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted to destroy me as a wife, as a mother, as a woman. Maybe they wanted me declared unfit. Maybe they wanted to take my child. But whatever it was, they had no idea what they had just unleashed. But I wasn't going to wait to be defeated. If they wanted to destroy my image, then I would expose theirs, not with words, but with proof. The next morning, I walked into a law firm that specialized in surveillance and emotional abuse cases. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a violation of privacy, of trust, of my very sanity, and I was done staying quiet. With the help of an attorney, calm, sharp, and deliberate, I filed the first set of documents. He watched a few of the videos, sat back, and said only one thing. They've dug their own graves. Only this time, the gift wouldn't be for me. It would be for them. A box with a screen, and inside that box, the truth. Every video, every lie, every stolen moment. But before I could execute it, something happened that nearly shattered my plan. It was a small note, folded, hidden inside my son's backpack. I found it wedged between his notebooks, written in neat cursive, unsigned. It said, "You need to leave. They're going to use the boy." For a long moment, I couldn't move. My entire body went cold. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This wasn't a theory. This was a warning. Someone inside that house knew more than they were saying, and the only thing keeping me there now wasn't fear. It was justice. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding that note for what felt like forever, my hands shaking so badly the paper crinkled. Every conversation from the past few weeks replayed in my mind, every look, every tone, every pause. Then I remembered something my mother-in-law had said just days before, her voice coated in that same sweet venom. "Danny's been so quiet lately, like he knows something he shouldn't." At the time, I'd brushed it off as another jab. Now I knew better. She wasn't hinting. She was warning me, in her own twisted way, that the game was almost over. And suddenly, it all made sense. They weren't just trying to ruin me. They were trying to turn my son against me, to make him see me as the problem, as something to be removed, as if I were disposable. By the time I reached his room, my heart was hammering so loud I could barely hear myself think. He was sitting on his bed, tracing patterns on the blanket with his fingers. I sat beside him gently, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Sweetheart, has anyone been saying strange things about Mommy?" He hesitated, his little eyes darting to the door as if he was afraid someone might be listening. Then, almost too softly to hear, he said, "Grandma said you want to take me away and never come back." My breath caught in my throat. For a second, the world stopped. I wanted to scream, to cry, to break something, but all I did was hold him tighter. "That's not true, baby," I told him. "I would never leave you. I would never hurt you." But I could see it in his eyes, the confusion, the fear, the tiny seed of doubt they had already planted. They were winning. Slowly, methodically, they were erasing me from his heart, using the innocence of childhood as their sharpest weapon. And that was something I would never forgive. What started as silent revenge had just turned into something far greater. Now I had a purpose: protect my son. The next morning, I made a decision that changed everything. I took the note from his backpack straight to my lawyer. She read it once, looked up, and said quietly, "We can use this." Together, we drafted an emergency clause, a formal request for the court to temporarily suspend my mother-in-law's contact with my son on grounds of emotional manipulation. If the judge approves, she said, you'll finally have room to act. And she was right. For the next few days, I waited in silence while the court reviewed the motion. Inside that house, the air grew heavier with every passing hour. My husband seemed restless, tense in a way I hadn't seen before. He started coming home earlier, pretending to tidy up, but I knew what he was doing. He was searching for evidence, for control, for something he thought he'd lost. One night, I caught his reflection in the computer screen, his hand moving toward my laptop when he thought I was asleep. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know it was already in motion. I was playing their game now, only this time, the rules were mine, and they didn't suspect a thing. Then, on Friday afternoon, the call came. The court had ruled in my favor. My mother-in-law's contact with my son was suspended indefinitely. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, not smiling out of spite, but out of sheer, trembling relief. For the first time in months, I could breathe. For the first time, I was truly protecting what I loved most. No matter how much they lied, twisted, or betrayed, I wasn't backing down anymore. I was going to fight, and I was going to win. Something inside me shifted that day. A new version of myself was born. Calm, steady, and cold in a way I never thought I could be. The following night, she showed up. My mother-in-law, banging on my front door, shouting loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "What did you do, you ungrateful brat?" Her voice cracked with rage, wild and unhinged. My son peeked out from the hallway, eyes wide, frightened. I told him softly, "Go to the backyard, honey." Then I closed the door. Quietly. I didn't need to say a word. Her desperation was its own confession. But still, I knew this was only the beginning. What came next, though, even I didn't expect. The next morning, I stepped outside and froze. My car was covered in scratches, deep white slashes of paint, spelling out words that burned to read. Crazy, monster, bad mom. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then I heard my son's small voice behind me. He'd seen it before I could stop him. He just stood there on the sidewalk, staring at the hateful words, his face blank with confusion. I knelt down beside him, keeping my voice soft. "Someone really sad must have done that," I said. But inside, I was burning. I knew exactly who it was, and I knew why. Another cheap attempt to shake me, to humiliate me in front of my child. I called the police, filed a report, answered every question. They took photos, noted details, and finally said what I already expected. Without cameras on the street, it'll be hard to prove. I nodded, silent. Let them think that. Because what my mother-in-law didn't know was that I had already installed a micro camera, tiny, nearly invisible, pointing straight at the garage entrance. That night, when I checked the footage, there she was, in a black coat, hood up, her face half hidden, but unmistakable. She walked up to my car with a paintbrush in hand, then turned and, as if to mark her territory, scrawled something across my gate before disappearing into the dark. The next day, I showed the video to my lawyer. She watched in silence, then turned to me and said quietly, "Now we've got everything." We attached the footage to the case and filed for a restraining order to keep her away from me and the house. It was my first real victory, not just legally, but personally. For the first time, the law was on my side. But the truth, I was exhausted. My son cried that night, clutching his pillow, asking, "Mommy, does Grandma hate me?" I held him close, my throat tight, and whispered, "No, baby. Grandma's just very confused right now." But in my heart, I knew this war wasn't over. It was only shifting into its next, darker phase. I said no, and I lied. Not out of malice, but to protect a small, fragile heart that couldn't yet understand what betrayal really meant. That Sunday, during lunch, the air was heavy again. My husband slammed his utensils down hard enough to rattle the plates. "You're tearing my family apart." I didn't even look up. I just kept eating, slowly, calmly. Inside, though, my stomach was a knot of fire. He had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. But that didn't surprise me. His silence in the face of their cruelty had always been louder than their insults. Now it only bothered him because I wasn't playing the quiet wife anymore. Later that afternoon, he stood by the door as I tried to leave, blocking my way. "You're turning the boy against his grandma. That's alienation, Dakota. Do you know what that means?" I almost laughed. The man who let them spy on me, who stayed silent while I was filmed without consent, was suddenly worried about emotional well-being. I pulled the court order from my bag and handed it to him. He stared at it for a moment before tearing it to shreds right in front of me. But I didn't flinch, because I had copies, and I had witnesses. That night, I found my son crying quietly in the bathroom, the sound of his small sobs echoing off the tiles. He looked up at me and said, between tears, "Daddy said, Mommy might be taken away if she doesn't get better soon." I sat down on the floor beside him and held him close, rocking him until his shaking stopped. That was it. That was the moment something in me broke, or maybe finally solidified. They were using his innocence, his fear of losing me, as a weapon. I couldn't wait any longer. The truth had to come out, not just in court, but in front of every single one of them. It was time to turn on the lights in that darkness. I revived my old plan, the birthday dinner. I sent out the invitations again, this time with a message about family reconciliation. And they all confirmed. Every hypocrite, smiling through texts, calling me sweetheart, pretending to be excited, all while sharpening their knives behind the screen. I rented a small, quiet venue, elegant but understated. Then I set up a projector, loaded every video file. No edits, no cuts, no manipulation. Just truth, raw and unfiltered. During the week leading up to the dinner, my husband grew strange. Always on his phone, whispering, hiding calls. Then one night, as I was hanging his jacket, a piece of paper slipped out of the pocket. It was a quote from a custody attorney, specializing in full parental rights. He was planning to take my son. I stood there for a long time, paper in hand, heartbeat pounding in my ears. But before he could make his move, something unexpected happened. His sister was the last person I ever expected to reach out to me. She'd always stayed out of everything, quiet, polite, detached, like a ghost drifting around the family chaos. So when she asked to meet me alone, I hesitated, but curiosity won. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place where the music is low and everyone whispers. She was already there when I arrived, sitting by the window, hands clasped tight around her cup. When I sat down, she looked up at me, and her face said everything before her words did. Pale, trembling, exhausted. She said quietly, "Dakota, I can't keep this in anymore." I didn't say a word, just waited. Her eyes filled with guilt as she continued, her voice breaking. "They've been planning this since last year. The cameras, the videos, everything." For a second, it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. My chest tightened, my fingers went numb. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and placed it on the table. I didn't even need to open it to know who it was from. The name at the top burned into my memory. My mother-in-law. The email subject line read, "Plan for if Dakota snaps." Inside were step-by-step instructions, how to install hidden cameras, what dates to film, and even phrases to use to push me toward a breakdown. "You're not okay. Forgetting things again? Do you need help?" I read every line, my pulse growing colder with each word. She told me she hadn't wanted to be part of it, but she was scared of being cut off from the family, of losing the financial help her mother gave her. But when she realized they were dragging my son into their scheme, she couldn't stay silent anymore. She slid a small flash drive across the table, her hand trembling. "Do whatever you want with it. Just keep me out of it." I stared at that tiny silver object like it was a weapon, because that's exactly what it was. One I finally had on my side. I took it with shaking hands, and for a moment I couldn't tell if the trembling came from rage or relief. What I felt wasn't just anger anymore. It was something deeper, colder, sharper. The pain had hardened into resolve. For months I had been reacting to their cruelty. Now, for the first time, I was in control. I didn't just have a story anymore. I had proof. Every message, every instruction, every calculated move. My silent revenge had just transformed into something far greater. Now I could expose not just what they'd done, but why they did it. I brought every piece of evidence to my lawyer. She read the email quietly, her eyes moving slowly down the page. When she finally looked up, her voice was steady but heavy. "Dakota," she said, "this isn't just a case of invasion of privacy. You've got grounds for defamation, illegal surveillance, emotional abuse, and attempted judicial fraud." It was more than I'd ever expected to hear. She immediately began drafting a new motion, weaving every file, every timestamp, every manipulation into the report. Within 72 hours, the judge signed it. Just like that, a legal wall went up. Neither my husband nor my mother-in-law could come anywhere near me or my son. Still, I didn't cancel the dinner. I wanted them there. I wanted them to believe everything was fine, that they had won. So I smiled, sent cheerful messages, confirmed their attendance, let them think I was forgiving, fragile, maybe even foolish. All the while, the real stage was being set. I hired a technician to manage the projector, prepared every clip, organized the seating, arranged the flowers, let soft music hum through the hall, a gentle mask for the storm that was coming. The morning of the dinner, I received an anonymous message on my phone. Don't trust anyone today, not even those who smile. For a few seconds, I froze. Was this another trick? A warning? It didn't matter. I was past fear. Whatever game they had left to play, I was ready for it. They wanted family drama. They wanted control. Tonight, they'd get neither. They'd only taste the bitter consequence of their own cruelty. When evening came, they all arrived one by one, dressed up, wearing polite smiles, pretending nothing had happened. They hugged me, called me strong, told me how good I looked. Even my mother-in-law handed me a bouquet like she hadn't tried to ruin my life. But the warmth in that room was fake, and it vanished the moment the lights dimmed. The projector flickered to life. The room fell into complete silence. Heavy, suffocating silence, as the first image appeared on the screen. My mother-in-law's voice filled the air, cold and calculating, caught mid-sentence on one of her own recordings. She screamed when she realized what was happening. But the worst part wasn't her reaction. It was that someone else stood up for her, and that would be the last time they ever did. The video continued, beginning with the gentlest image possible. I started by reading a story to my son, soft, ordinary, the kind of moment that should have been private. Then the screen flickered, and a recording filled the room, my mother-in-law's voice, cold and clinical. She'll destroy herself. We just need to give her a little push. A few people laughed, clueless about what that line really meant. Others shifted, suddenly uneasy. Then came the reveal. Side-by-side footage, the edited clips they'd used as evidence next to the uncut originals. The montage showed the truth in brutal clarity. One edited clip claimed I'd had a late-night meltdown. Beside it, the raw file showed me quietly crying while reading a farewell letter from my late father. The manipulation was grotesque. Faces around the room changed like weather. There was a sharp thud as my mother-in-law slammed her hand on the table. Someone accused her, and for the first time, her husband stood up. You set it up, Agnes, not her. I bought the first camera, but I never know you were manipulating the child. You've gone too far. She gasped, searching for the room for an ally or an escape. There was none. My husband lunged for the projector, trying to cut the feed, but the technician I'd hired was ready. He leaned toward the console, glanced at me, and I gave a small nod. The next clip played. My husband, voice low, telling his lawyer, I'll push her until she loses custody. Then we'll get the house and the kid. A woman in the family began to sob. An uncle stood and walked out. My son wasn't there to see any of it, thank God. He was at a friend's for the weekend, part of my plan. I didn't want him to witness the wreckage yet. This was my revenge. Deliberate. Clean and painful. I didn't want applause. I wanted one thing. Justice. And in that room, I finally felt it. Justice. When the lights came back on, no one could meet my eyes. Some mumbled apologies, others slipped out in silence. My mother-in-law sat frozen, her face drained of color. Her husband quietly stepped away from her like she was contagious. My own husband just stared at me, disbelief twisting his expression. You ruined everything, he hissed. I looked him straight in the eye and said, I didn't ruin anything. I just removed the masks. The rest, you did all on your own. Then I stood up, gathered my things, and walked out, leaving them to drown in the truth they created. In the car, I finally exhaled. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from release. My phone buzzed, a new court notification. Full temporary custody granted. No contact order approved until next hearing. The words glowed like a lifeline. I'd won. But that peace lasted only minutes. When I got home, I kicked off my shoes and collapsed on the couch. The room was still, too still. I reached for the light switch, and that's when I saw it. A white envelope sat neatly on the coffee table. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photograph of me, asleep. On the back, a message written in a neat, slanted hand. You still don't know what I'm capable of. My blood turned to ice. It was recent, I could tell. My hair, the sheets, even the book lying open beside me, all from the night before. Someone had been inside my home, after the dinner, after the restraining orders, after I thought I'd finally escaped them. I scanned the room. The windows were locked, so was the front door. But the back? The old spare keys my mother-in-law used to have? Or worse, did my husband still have a hidden way in? Panic crawled up my throat as I checked every door, every corner, every shadow. It felt like reliving the nightmare of the hidden cameras, only this time the thread wasn't digital. It was breathing. I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer. She answered on the first ring. Don't panic, she said firmly. Put the photo in a plastic bag. Take it straight to the police first thing in the morning. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Someone still wanted to play. That's exactly what I did. The next morning, I went straight to the police station and filed a report for trespassing and stalking. Officers came to my house, took photos of the envelope, dusted for prints, and asked all the right questions. But deep down, I knew how this kind of thing went. If they were already this close, then they were careful, calculating. The next few nights were hell. I slept with every light on and a kitchen knife tucked under my pillow. Every creak, every gust of wind, every hum of the fridge made me sit bolt upright. Sleep became a battlefield. And the worst part, I knew this was exactly what they wanted, to push me past the edge, to make me collapse under my own fear. But I'd learned something through all of this. Desperation isn't weakness, it's fuel. My lawyers filed for a full perimeter restriction, not just around my house, but the entire street and its adjoining blocks. This time, the judge didn't hesitate. The order was approved with electronic monitoring. If anyone under that restraining order came within a certain distance, I'd get an alert. And yet, even that didn't bring peace, because the real attacks weren't physical anymore. They were psychological. My husband, or ex-husband, as I now thought of him, started playing the victim. He told people I'd kicked him out unfairly, that I was unstable. He began posting old pictures of himself with our son, smiling, happy, with captions like, "Alienated father, love shouldn't be punished." The internet did what it always does. It chose a side without knowing the story. Comments flooded in. Strangers called me cruel, vindictive, unfit. And yes, the pain returned, but this time I was ready for it. I didn't fight back with insults or emotions. I created an anonymous account, one that couldn't be traced to me, and I began posting the truth, the videos, the audio, the documents, all with dates, context, and no commentary, no rage, no accusations, just raw, undeniable evidence. The first post got 10 views, then 100, then 10,000, and within a week, 100,000 people were watching them expose themselves. Within just a few days, local news outlets began picking up my story, framing it as a case study in psychological abuse and family manipulation. My inbox filled with messages from women, mothers, even sons, people who had lived through their own versions of the same nightmare. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was being heard. My voice was growing louder, carrying further than I ever expected. But that peace didn't last. One quiet night, as I was finishing an email to my lawyer, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A low, distorted voice, metallic, emotionless, came through the speaker. "You're exposing too much. and we're not the only ones watching now. Then the line went dead. I just stood there, frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. That voice, it wasn't my mother-in-law. It wasn't my husband either. It was colder, detached, like someone observing from the outside, irritated, maybe threatened. For the first time since this all began, I felt a different kind of fear. This wasn't just about family anymore. I sat there in the dark replaying the words. We're not the only ones watching. Who else? Who else had something to lose if this story kept spreading? That same week, the video of my husband speaking to his lawyer, plotting to push me until I lose custody, went viral. Millions of views. TikTok creators were dissecting it, sharing clips, adding commentary. The public outrage was massive. Then came a message from a stranger. He did something similar to me years ago, but no one believed me. My heart stopped. Could this have happened before? I immediately called my lawyer and asked her to dig into my husband's past records. What she found made my stomach knot. There had been a similar custody case years ago. A woman had accused him of emotional abuse, manipulation, and falsifying recordings, but she withdrew her complaint before it reached trial. Maybe she was threatened. Maybe she was just too tired to keep fighting. I tracked her down, sent a message, and waited, not really expecting a reply. But she answered. We met a few days later in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, and what she told me made my skin crawl. The tactics were identical. The pattern was undeniable. She'd been recorded too, gaslit, discredited, pushed into isolation until she had no fight left. But in her story, there was an extra piece. A name. A family friend. Influential. Powerful. The very partner at the law firm where my husband worked. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. My husband hadn't been acting alone. There was a network, a web of men protecting each other, using their positions to bury the evidence and silence the women who spoke up. It wasn't just manipulation anymore. It was systemic. I drove home with my hands trembling on the steering wheel, my mind spiraling. As soon as I got there, I pulled out every legal document I had, the divorce papers, property agreements, contracts, and combed them line by line. And there it was, the partner's signature over and over again. He wasn't just an observer. He was an architect, the quiet hand behind the curtain. Worse, he managed most of my husband's assets. If I really wanted to end this, to slice through the roots instead of the branches, I'd have to go where it hurt the most, their money and their reputation. So I started collecting everything, emails, screenshots, the testimony from the other woman. She gave me permission to include it in my case. Her voice shook when she handed me the folder, but her eyes burned with something fierce. She said, "End it for both of us." Together, we built a wall of evidence, enough to expose them not only as abusers, but as men who used the law to protect their crimes. When I brought it all to my lawyer, she didn't even speak for a minute. Then she simply said, "We're taking this to the Bar Association." If the plan worked, the partner would lose his license, and my husband would lose his job, his status, his protection. That would be their first fall. But I wasn't done. There was one final act left, the public reckoning. The firm's charity gala was set for Saturday night. Both of them, my ex-husband and his mentor, were listed as keynote speakers. The topic? Family values and ethical practice. The irony was almost poetic. I decided then that would be my stage.
No shouting, no chaos. Just facts. Documents, photos, recordings, their own words turned against them. They'd take the stage to talk about morality, and on the giant screen behind them, I'd show the world who they truly were. The room froze, not in confusion, but in recognition. People didn't blink, didn't whisper, they just watched. On the screen, their carefully curated image of power and morality shattered frame by frame. My ex-husband's voice filled the hall first, cold, calculating, unmistakable. If we get her unstable enough, she'll lose custody. Then we'll move everything under my name. It's cleaner that way. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. The sound of it breaking was almost rhythmic, like punctuation to the lies unraveling. Then came the emails, the partner's own words projected for all to see. She'll fold soon. Keep pressure. If she goes public, we bury her in filings. Every face in that hall shifted. The applause had turned to horror, the kind of silence that rang. My ex-husband shouted from the stage, voice trembling, "This is defamation! She's mentally unstable!" But before he could finish, the video cut to a split screen of him and his lawyer, laughing. "If she breaks, I'll have everything. Custody, the house, the pity. That's how the system works, right?" It wasn't my voice accusing him now. It was his own. The partner tried to leave, but 2 journalists blocked his way, phones already recording. Reporters whispered his name, snapping photos, live tweeting every word. His face turned the color of paper. I stood there, steady, holding the microphone. You built your careers on destroying women quietly, but I decided not to go quietly. The projector behind me changed again, not to words this time, but to faces. Screenshots from messages from other women, their testimonies, their timelines, all linking back to the same men, the same firm. One woman in the crowd stood up, then another. Within seconds, the air shifted, no longer cold or afraid, but electric. Security surrounded the stage, not for me, but for them. The partner's wife had collapsed in her chair, tears streaking her makeup. My ex's colleagues whispered, stepping away as if his guilt were contagious. And then came the final blow. The last slide, a scanned image of the house sale contract, dated 2 days earlier. My home. My name missing. I said, my voice cracking, "He sold our house," before the judge even ruled, to a woman named Megan Lang. Whoever she is, she's welcome to the walls, because the truth now lives here. The audience erupted, not in applause, but in disbelief. Journalists swarmed forward, flashbulbs burst. I stepped back, handed the mic to the moderator, and whispered, "Thank you. My part's done." Then I turned and walked out. Outside, the cool night air hit my face like a baptism. For a moment, I just stood there, hearing the chaos erupt behind the doors, the shouts, the scrambling, the sound of everything they'd built collapsing. My phone buzzed, a text from my lawyer. "They're trending. The Bar Association already called an emergency meeting." I smiled faintly. For the first time in years, it wasn't out of relief or victory. It was out of freedom. But as I reached my car, I noticed something on the windshield. Another envelope. Same white paper, no name. I opened it slowly. Inside, one photograph. The event hall taken from above, from the mezzanine, with me at the center, mid-speech. And written across the back in black ink, "You're not finished yet." The night wind howled through the parking lot, lifting the corner of the photo in my hand, and I realized exposing monsters doesn't end them. It only shows you how many more were watching in the dark. It wasn't angry, it wasn't threatening, it was calm, almost admiring. Like whoever sent it wasn't warning me, but watching me. I stared at the image. The house looked ordinary. Beige walls, trimmed lawn, a porch light flickering through the rain. But something about it felt wrong, like it had been chosen deliberately. A new beginning or a reminder that I'd never truly escaped the shadows I'd exposed. For a moment, I thought about deleting it, pretending it never came. But that's how it had all started, ignoring the little things, the quiet signs that danger wasn't always loud. So I saved it, forwarded it to my lawyer. Then I turned off the phone, locked the door, and went to check on my son. He was fast asleep, the soft rhythm of his breathing filling the room. I stood there in the doorway, watching him, realizing something I hadn't before. Revenge had given me justice, but healing would demand something else entirely. Peace. I whispered a promise to him. No more war, no more fear, just life. Then I walked to the window, opened it, and let the rain drift in. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like cleansing. And that's when I understood revenge doesn't end the story. It just clears the ground for a new one. Because the truth is, some people never stop watching, but they stop winning the moment you stop being afraid. There were no insults, no anger, just a chilling calm. A reminder that for people like them, losing isn't surrender, it's strategy. A signal that when they can't win outright, they'll find another way to wound you. I showed the message to my lawyer. She told me to update the police report, to treat it as an indirect threat. The police opened an investigation, but there was little they could do. The number was untraceable. A disposable burner. Another ghost in the dark, hiding behind silence. That week I began noticing things. A car parked across the street, same spot, tinted windows, no license plate. It lingered for hours. I told myself it was a coincidence, but when it showed up again the next day by day, and the next, I knew it wasn't. I called the police again. They sent a patrol car, but by the time it arrived, the vehicle had vanished. It was psychological warfare, subtle, invisible, impossible to prove, the kind designed to make you unravel slowly. But I refused to give them that satisfaction. I installed top-tier security cameras with remote access, a smart alarm system connected to a 24/7 monitoring center. Every door, every window reinforced. This was no longer about revenge. It was about reclaiming control, emotional survival, refusing to become another woman who won on paper but lost her peace. My son asked me one morning why we suddenly had so many locks, so many buttons and codes. I smiled and said, because sometimes, even after the storm ends, you keep the roof strong, just in case the rain comes back. His school helped too, setting up a new protocol to keep strangers away. Slowly, life became manageable again. I didn't live in panic anymore. I lived in awareness. And while the vigilance was exhausting, it made me sharper, stronger. Because survival, I learned, isn't just about breathing. It's about never letting fear speak louder than your peace. I realized something terrifying. Even broken, even alone, I was still a threat to them. Because I knew too much. Because I spoke what they'd tried to bury. Because I won. And people like them, the ones who live on lies, they never forgive the truth. They just wait for it to stop echoing. So I began to write. Every detail, every manipulation, every night I spent terrified of my own reflection. At first it was therapy, but then it became something else, a record, a message for my son, a way to make sure that if anyone ever tried to rewrite what happened, he'd know. He'd know from me, from the woman who lived it, not from the world that distorted it. Every sentence felt like a scar being stitched shut. Every page was a piece of my voice I refused to lose again. On the last one, I wrote 3 words. It's not over. Because it wasn't. I could feel it in the quiet between phone rings, in the faint shadows outside my windows, in messages that appeared and disappeared before I could read them. Someone was still there, watching, waiting. Then, one night, As I reread the documents, the house sale, the fake buyer's name, something clicked. Megan Lang. Too clean, too generic. It didn't sound like a real person. It sounded crafted. So I started digging. Public records, databases, even old social media accounts. Most led nowhere, until one did. An inactive Instagram profile. No posts, no followers. Just one profile photo, black and white. The moment I saw that face, my stomach dropped. I knew that face. It took me a few minutes to remember where from. A photograph buried deep in my ex-husband's old college album. A party in the basement of his mother's house. Everyone smiling, red cups in hand, and there she was, Megan Lang, sitting on his lap. Not like a friend, like a secret that had never really gone away. The caption under it read, "My first home." And suddenly, everything snapped into place. The timing, the sale, the fake name, the message. She wasn't some new woman who showed up after me. She was the original ghost, the one that never truly left the picture. The invisible piece that had been on the chessboard long before I even got married. My mother-in-law's words suddenly echoed in my mind. Some people just don't know their place. I used to think it was just one of her cruel remarks, but now I understood. She wasn't talking about me. She was talking about Megan, the woman who had always been Plan B. The one kept in the shadows, groomed for the day I'd finally fall. That house contract, it wasn't just a transaction. It was a message, a symbol of victory they thought was already theirs. Their way of saying, "You're erased. We've moved on." I sat with that thought for a long time. How much of my life had been quietly directed by hands I never saw? How much of my pain had been orchestrated before I ever realized I was in a game? But now, I saw it, and that made me dangerous again. I filed a motion to annul the house sale, fraudulent transfer backed by evidence of the pre-existing relationship between the buyer and the seller. I attached proof of Megan's identity history, her connection to my ex, and her participation in the emotional harassment. The court agreed. The property was frozen, placed under judicial review. And then, just like that, Megan vanished. Her phone number stopped working. The burner line that sent the last message went dark. No social media, no traces, nothing.
You'd think that would have brought me peace, but instead, it left me with a silence I couldn't trust, a silence too deliberate, too careful. I started to live again, cooking, working, laughing with my son. He was smiling more, sleeping through the night. The house felt like home again, but even in the quiet, I could never shake that instinct to glance over my shoulder, to double-check the locks, to keep the cameras on. Because people like them don't stop. They hibernate. They wait for the next chance, the next crack in your armor. And I couldn't afford to be naive again. Not after everything I'd lost. The wound had closed, but the skin would never feel the same. Then, one evening, I came home to a blinking red light on the answering machine. One new voicemail. No number. Blocked ID. I pressed play. 3 seconds. No words. Just the sound of a child's voice whispering, barely audible. It's her. And I knew that voice. It was my son's. The audio had been short, barely 3 seconds, but it was enough to shatter every illusion of safety I'd rebuilt. It wasn't random, it wasn't edited, it was intimate. The tone, the pause, the way my son's breath trembled, it was taken from somewhere private, somewhere no one should have been listening. That realization broke something in me. I tore through every inch of my house, every shelf, every frame, every corner of the ceiling where a shadow looked too still. Nothing. But the sound,
the sound was real. I brought the recording to the police. They listened, exchanged cautious glances, and said maybe it was a fake, maybe AI generated. But I knew better. It was too personal, too exact. This wasn't a threat anymore. It was a message. They still had access. That night, unable to sleep, I sat in bed with all the lights off. My heart wouldn't slow down. And that's when I saw it. A faint blue flicker reflected in the mirror, small, almost invisible. I turned slowly. The glow came from the lampshade. I walked toward it like someone moving through a nightmare, afraid that even breathing would make it vanish. But it didn't. It was real. Inside the frame, tucked between the metal and fabric, was a tiny blue LED, barely the size of a pinhead, a micro camera, aimed directly at my bed. My knees buckled. How? How could this still be happening? After everything, after the court orders, the restraining measures, the security systems. My body went numb as I dialed the police, the words spilling out of me like a confession. They arrived within minutes, scanned the lamp, collected the device, and this time, they found something. Based on the model's internal serial and frequency, the tech unit traced the signal's receiver. The address popped up on their screen. Familiar. A rental apartment. Registered under the name Megan Lang. And the payments? Made through a business account belonging to my ex-husband's former partner. It was all connected. All of it. Every thread of manipulation, every invasion, every ghost message, it led back to the same web. But this time, I didn't want peace. I didn't want distance or silence. I wanted justice. With all the evidence gathered, my lawyer moved fast. Formal charges, stalking, violation of a court order, invasion of privacy, and endangerment of a minor. The judge didn't hesitate. A search warrant was signed within hours. When the police reached Megan's apartment in daylight, there was no dramatic chase, no denial. Just a door opening to reveal walls covered in obsession. Multiple screens, photos of me and my son, scribbled notes, timestamps, printed images of our daily lives. It wasn't curiosity, it was fixation. It was madness. And that's where it ended for her. Megan Lang, if that was even her real name, was arrested. And for the first time, when I saw the police car drive away, I didn't feel revenge. I felt release. The ex-partner, too. My ex-husband was indicted as an accomplice for covering up their actions, even after the first complaints. The media exploded with the story. What started with a woman secretly filmed turned into a national scandal, a case of stalking, corruption, and manipulation that shook everything they'd built. For the first time, I saw all three faces on the news, not as winners, but as criminals. And me? I went back to living. I moved to a smaller town, a quiet cul-de-sac with kind neighbors and flowers in every window, a new job, a new rhythm, a new kind of peace. My son laughs often now. He's growing up lighthearted. He knows the basics of what we went through, just enough to understand why I double-check the locks, but not enough to carry the weight of my past. I never got another threat, never saw another car parked out front, never again had to sleep with a knife under my pillow. Today, when I look in the mirror, I don't see the exhausted woman who used to fear her own home. I see a survivor, a mother, a force. And if anyone ever tries to erase me again, I hope they know. I already went to war with my own family and came back with their heads on a platter. If this story gripped you, go watch the one on the left, and don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps me keep sharing powerful stories like this one.